Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ann George, Professor of Rhetoric and Writing in the English Department. We're so glad you've joined us to celebrate the career of Dr. Richard Leo Enos. All around, I see family and colleagues, current and former students, including some who have flown across the country to be here. Thank you all for making Rich's Day so special. Enormous thanks, too, to our wonderful office staff, Mary Roberts and Regina Lewis, who have made this lovely send-off possible. Let's give them some. Today's program features Dr. Enos's last lecture, followed by a tribute from former student Dr. Joanna Trapp. Then we welcome you to stay for refreshments and conversation. Over the past 46 years, Richard Enos has profoundly influenced the field of rhetorical studies, which examines oral and written communication, persuasion, and more generally, the effects created by language. He has studied and taught classical Greek and Roman rhetoric, worked on reconstructing the Etruscan alphabet, written about the secret composing practices of ancient Spartans, which I didn't know about, and most recently analyzed the earliest document written in Latin by a woman, which was fun because it was a birthday invitation. But while other scholars focused almost exclusively on canonical texts, Rich explored Greek rhetoric before Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle came on the scene, and thus almost single-handedly opened up a new field of study. And while other scholars imagined the kinds of reading and writing women in ancient Greece might have done and theorized about their rhetorical power, Rich had the radical idea that we might actually go to Greece to look for evidence in archives and archaeological sites. Rich Enos not only reshaped the field of rhetorical studies, but he also helped build a professional organization that holds the field together, the Rhetoric Society of America, which began in 1968 with a dozen or so scholars in a hotel room somewhere, and now has nearly 1,400 members. Rich was RSA's fourth president and served on its board of directors. For this work in 2006, he received the Society's Distinguished Service Award and was inducted into an elite group of RSA fellows. Rich came to TCU in 1995 as the fourth Lillian B. Radford Chair in Rhetoric and Composition, which is the oldest endowed chair in the country in rhetoric and composition. And since then, he has enriched undergraduate and graduate education, contributed to faculty governance, honed TCU's vision, and tirely supported its mission. In 2008, he received the Chancellor's Award for Distinguished Achievement as a Creative Teacher and Scholar, and in 2009 was named a Piper Professor for the state of Texas. Most recently, Dr. Trapp and a host of former students nominated Rich for RSA's Mentorship Award, and last spring, generations of his students gathered in Minneapolis to watch him receive this prestigious award and to fill a room with the remarkable extended horned frog family Rich has nurtured. But you can read all about his scholarly and pedagogical achievements on his CV. What I really want to celebrate today are the quiet, personal acts that have made Rich such a treasured mentor and colleague. I'm sure many of you have similar stories to tell. Here are mine. I remember one time, a few years after I arrived at TCU, we were talking about the fast approaching, increasingly stressful deadline for my tenure book, and I mentioned that I'd be spending 2 weeks in my graduate seminar teaching one of his favorite texts, The New Rhetoric, about which you don't need to know anything except that it's 600 pages of very dense theory in very small print. It was a book I did not know well then, and he volunteered on the spot to teach both sessions of the class so I could skip the enormous prep time and concentrate on my writing. Who does that? And later, just as I and another female colleague were coming up for tenure, we suddenly found ourselves without a department chair, potentially headed for receivership, and Rich volunteered to be the temporary chair. He did it partly out of his commitment to the department's welfare, of course, but also, he later told me, to ensure our tenure cases, and especially that critical chair's letter, weren't handed over to a stranger. He stepped up to be chair so that he could shepherd our cases through the tenure and promotion process. Seriously, who does that? And there's one other moment in particular that is locked in my memory and in my heart, a quieter personal moment that epitomizes the Rich Enos I admire so deeply. Shortly after I arrived at TCU, while I was still trying to remember the Xerox code and find my way around Sid Richardson, although I think I didn't ever really get that one, I received page proofs of my first journal article. I had no idea what to do. Do I make corrections in pen, in pencil? Do I use standard proofreading marks? Do I even know standard proofreading marks? So I went to Rich for advice, and he explained that the best way to proofread was for someone to read the original aloud while the author followed along on the proofs. I was mentally calculating how many apple pies it would take to cajole my husband into reading a long academic essay on Joseph Priestley and 18th century rhetoric when Rich offered to be the reader. I was overcome that he would volunteer for this completely unenviable task. When I asked to make an appointment for us to work, he simply said, "How about now?" I was dumbstruck. The renowned Dr. Enos dropped everything to help little me. And so we sat there in his office reading along. I'm sure he had other plans for the day. I'm sure his throat was parched by the time he got to that final page, and that he'd heard much more about Joseph Priestley than he ever cared to know. It was a stunning gesture of the purest generosity, one I am still humbled by. So thank you, Rich, for your groundbreaking scholarship, your leadership and wisdom, but most of all, thank you for your enormous heart. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Richard Leo Enos.
God bless you. Thank you. There's no way I can follow that. You should know this. I want to say the obvious by saying how much I appreciate all of you coming today and how much it means to me. I wanted to say before we get on the clock, I just wanted to say that in the last year I've been reflecting on my teaching and what it means, and there are sometimes some odd things come into your mind. Like I don't even know if I can explain this, but in the year that I started teaching as an assistant professor, 1973, that date, 73, is closer to the end of World War II than that date is now. The other thing that amazed me is when I was first an assistant professor, I was at the University of Michigan, and we had a very old professor. He had long since retired. His name was Preston Slauson. You could look this up, Preston Slauson, and he taught modern European history. And he loved to go to commencement. And but he had to be approaching his 90s. And so they asked if an assistant professor would escort him, because we had get on the bus and off and on the stage. And I did. And two things really stuck with me about Preston Slauson, and now I understand why. One is he's the only professor I ever met who, one, wore out his cap and gown, and mine is tattered too, because he got his PhD, listen to this, from the University of Columbia in 1913. The other thing was, and this is what really amazed me, is that Preston Slauson helped, directly worked with Woodrow Wilson to draft the Treaty of Versailles. So that's how old I really am. Yeah, like Oscar Wilde would say, there's a picture up in the third floor that looks like hell, but here I am, and that's an inside joke for lit people. All right, but anyway, I thought about this, and I know this is probably going to sound more like a sermon than a lecture, and a rambling one at that, but I do want to share with you my experiences over the last 46 years. Because for 46 years I've been saying to students, well, learn this, we'll learn that, and now I'm going to try to tell you what I learned. And it's hard to do it so I'm throwing myself on the mercy of the audience, right, to see if this makes sense. I took some solace in the New Testament. Matthew says, where's the religion people? I better be careful. Matthew says in 10, he says, and he says in Matthew 10, he says, there are times, he says, when you are not only going to not know what to say, you're not even going to know how to say it. He says, but when that time comes, this is what Matthew said, when that time comes, trust the Spirit of the Father. So I hope you hear this, and Matthew, I hope you're right, because I'm laying my faith on this. I want to also tell you that another experience, and that is that when I had the chance to, as Ann said, I was an interim chair before we got a real chair in here to just sort of hold things and get things going. And I had the great honor of hosting or coordinating, or whatever we want to call it, the retirement for my dear late friend Bob Fry. And Bob really tried to thank everybody. And of course, see, I realized that's impossible. You can't, at one moment to do that. And so for years later, Bob would say to me, we'd be whatever we were doing, and he would say, Rich, I forgot to say at my comments, I forgot to say thank you to this person. Oh, and he would really be, I don't know if Alice is here or not, but is Alice here? Alice, this is Bob's wife, Alice. And Bob would worry, right, for years, did I say this? And I realize now why he thought that. So I just want to say I love you all, and I thank you all, and I appreciate everything you did. I know I wish I could go around right now and thank every one of you, because I sincerely mean that. What did I learn as a professor? What did I learn? Well, this will sound a little bit odd, but one of the things I learned about being a professor, it came from different areas. One of them was from the football coach, Lou Holtz, who coached not only at Notre Dame, which is what he's, I think, probably proudest of. He coached at William and Mary in South Carolina. He was successful wherever he was. And Lou Holtz said there's three things that are important. And I think they apply to being a professor, too. And there's actually two ideas that he said, but the first one has three parts to it. He said, he would tell his football players, do the right thing. Try your best. Show people that you care. And that applies to professors, too. You always try to do what's best for the students. Sometimes they don't think it's the best. You try your best. Students recognize when you're trying hard, and they're incredibly forgiving. There have been times when I was working on a research deadline, and I'd come to class exhausted, and I would say, look, if this doesn't make any sense, or less sense than normal, right, I'm doing my best, but I'm working on this. And so if you don't understand it, it's not you, it's me. I never had anything but support from you guys for doing that. And you show people that you care. It's great to show that you have passion for what you do. And it is contagious. And it's okay. Just like, when you watch little kids when they're young, they're really excited about school. Then something happens. And then hopefully it rekindles. But it'll get you through a lot. The other thing I learned from Lou Holtz is what he said is, what are the two best days of your life? He says, the day you're born and the day you learn why you were born. And I'm very lucky because I learned that my dream was to be a husband and a father and a professor. And I got to do those things, and I got to do them together. And that is incredibly fortunate. Sometimes students come in, and they understandably will say, I'm not sure what I want to do. I don't know. And I tell them, you have to listen to yourself, and don't put too much pressure on yourself. It will come to you naturally. You just have to listen to yourself. When I was working on putting my ideas together, it was one of the first things that popped into my brain. I don't know why, but the first thing I did, because I would make notes throughout this last year, and one of the first things I said to myself is, never give up on a student. That's one of the first things I wrote down. Never give up on a student. And that's important because they remain your students after the class is over. Now, sometimes you teach a class and the students are there to have a requirement. You're there 16 weeks. But there are a lot of students who are there, and it's a moment in their lives that you can build on. And you have to be able to recognize that. And I think probably one of the most important things I'll say right now is teaching is no dog and pony show. It's not like sometimes we have to, make an observation, and that's understandable. We go in, but it's not any kind of tips or tricks. It's a relationship of trust and mutual respect that's built over time. That's why, and the grad students here know this, I'm incredibly, and I say this with intent, I'm incredibly cordial to beginning graduate students. And then as they get older, I'm more blunt, surly, because they already know I love them. They know I think the world of them. They know that I'm after for what's best. So I'll look at one of them and I'll say, what was that? And they don't go to pieces because they know I'm trying to do the best for them. And that just takes time. And it's a bond. And it's a wonderful bond. It's a bond that goes far beyond the classroom. Also, I don't know if Mags is here, but we worked on, and Chancellor, thank you for coming today. Thank you very much. We worked on the Lead On campaign, and part of that was to work on a committee that Dee and Leo coordinated, and that, thank you also, I know they're here, and that was with Mags, who on the teacher-scholar model. And I learned a lot about what it means to be a professor, not only from my experiences, but what was reinforced by the way Mags coordinated that committee. There are some universities, and just trust me, there are some universities where you can be competent in teaching. And that is the word, competent. But you better be a crackerjack researcher. You better be that. There are some schools where it's all about teaching, and if you publish something, they'll put it up, and I'm not being sarcastic, they literally will put it up on the bulletin board outside the office. And that's good, it's good. The most difficult and challenging model and the best model is what we have at TCU. That is the teacher-scholar model. It's like an athlete. I used to say when people are NCAA athletes, they have two jobs. They have two full-time jobs. Full-time student, full-time athlete. And God help if you go to a military academy where you're a full-time student, full-time athlete, full-time soldier, right? And the teacher-scholar model isn't like, well, we're going to split it up. You better care about the teaching, and you better give everything you have, and you better give everything you have to your scholarship. Luckily, thank God, there's a synergy. They feed off each other. They work together. But it's a great model. It's not, I think it's the most challenging, but I also think it's the best. How do you motivate students? A lot of it is motivation. And there's at least 3 ways you can motivate students. Fear, you can do fear appeals. You can scare the hell out of them. They'll do the work, but they may resent you. And they won't feel any bond. You could be popular. You could be one of the gang. And that might help with the relationship. And maybe it can help with some with the learning, but I never felt comfortable that way. The way that I tried to do it was to try to earn their respect. And there'll be times when they don't like you pushing them so hard, but it will get to the point that they want to do it because they want to do it. I've learned also as a professor that when I would do advising, and I used to do advising not just for our department, but in another school for all different majors. And there's a very dangerous sign with students. I learned this as a professor. First, the good part is when they come in and they tell you how much they want to do this major. So, I've been thinking about this since high school. I can't wait. I just love it. And then sometimes that's fulfilled. That's great, it's fulfilled. But sometimes it's not. It's not what they thought it was when they were in high school. And then you know what they do? They start talking about the residuals. They'll say things like how much money they're going to make, that boat they're going to have, the cabin that they're going to have somewhere, all the goodies. And I ask them, I say, Why are you willing to sacrifice 5 days of a work week for a weekend? As you all know, if you love what you do, you never have to work a day in your life. Now, the other thing I learned from a professor came from my being in the inner city. I grew up inside Oakland, where Marshawn Lynch of NFL fame lived about a block and a half from where I grew up, and his mother was so terrified that as a child she wouldn't let him leave the apartment complex. I lived a block and a half from Oakland Tech. You can look it up. And did I learn anything about being a professor from being a kid from inner city Oakland? Well, yeah. First thing I learned is, and this is a little, you're going to hear a lot of our trade terms, don't be a porcelain prince. You know what a porcelain prince is? Is that as professors, we could throw rocks at everybody, but somebody throws a little pebble at us and we go to pieces. Learn how to take a punch. That's one of the things you learn. People don't talk about that in inner city. It's not about learning about fighting. It's learning how to survive, how to take a punch. And sometimes the criticism is justified. Avoid spotlight service at TCU. Spotlight service means, look at me, I'm doing service to the university. How about that? Look at this. I tell the grad students there's a lot of time to make this thing work where we have to take tickets at the gate and pick up Pepsi bottles at the end, and nobody is going to care except we've got to do it to get it done, and you're not going to get any credit for it, but oh well, that's what will make it happen. I also tell them that and my dad was a welder, and I knew this, but it applies to telling my students and as being a professor. I tell them there's really only one job description. There's only one job description. Be tough, be smart, be a hard worker who's a good citizen and a team player. You keep your word and you keep the deadlines, you'll thrive. You'll thrive. I've learned that also about being a professor from the athletes whom I've taught. One of the things that is important for any athlete is a warm-up and a cool-down. And the students are going to start smiling because I know they use this in class. I try to arrive at class 15 or 20 minutes early. And I just chat with them. I would talk about ideas, and we talk about what it means to be a professor in ways you're not going to get into class. But these are the things you should know. And I give a great professor, Richard Young, the credit for teaching me about this. And sometimes the students start to come to class even earlier, just so we can chat. And if we have time at the end, we have a cool down like athletes, so you can kind of, because it's hard. I tell you, it's hard to be a student and to concentrate that hard for a long time. And that's the other thing I learned from athletes about being a professor. And that is, see, there's in athletics, there's three kinds of fatigue. There's event fatigue. I just finished this game and I'm exhausted. There's season fatigue. It's the end of the season and I'm wiped out. And then there's career fatigue. That's it. Now you have to be able to read students because you have to see, like if you have a long class, if it goes an hour and a half, 2, 3 hours, you have to see when their eyes start to glaze over. Time for a break. Let's take a break. Also, and I will tell the students, they never knew this, and some of you, I'm not going to look at you because you are the ones that helped me. When you're teaching, you really have to have a rapport with the students. Because here's what will happen. You'll say something. You'll say some concept they've never heard before. And of course, you've been studying it for 30 years, so you think, okay, well, I know it. And there's always, and this is true, God knows this is true, I'm looking at one person right now, I'm going to get away from it. There is always one student who does not, I'll tell you the secret now, who doesn't realize they are showing every emotion on their face. So I'm lecturing and I'm going through, I'm lecturing and I'm going through, and they're saying, I'm looking, and I'm talking about this, and they're going, I don't know if you can see my face in the back, but they're going. And so I can't stare at that student because then once they know, that's it, right? So I realize I didn't get the point across. So I'll just go and I'll say, well, we're doing this, and like I said, and Perlman said this about dissociation of concepts, and they're going, what? And I'll go, now here's another way to look at it. And I'll try to do another way, and then they'll go, okay, and then, all right. So you have to check the student with the open face. There's a saying at Notre Dame that applies to TCU. What's good for the student is good for TCU. Very simple. That's the denominator of our fraction. It's good for the student. It's good for TCU. Be sure when you talk to the students, I learned this as a professor, you tell one story. You don't have to say one story to one person, one story to somebody else. You tell the story that you understand it to be best. When I was a high school student, I was taught by the Christian Brothers, which is a religious teaching order. I was at St. Mary's High School. You probably know the college, St. Mary's College in California. And this is what Brother Bernard used to make us say to him. Never say yes when you mean no. Never say no when you mean yes. And if you don't know, say, I don't know. And the students respect that. They respect when a professor doesn't know the answer, but the next class period has tried to find that out. Please keep in contact. I learned this with former students. And here's another thing we do. Sometimes, if when there's a lot of professors in this room, we'll get to know every student by first name. You know them, you talk to them the whole semester, and then we have like a Christmas break, and you're away for a month. And because we have a brand new set of class, and we're working hard to remember everybody's name, and you see a former student in the hall. And if you don't remember their name, you could see they're a little crestfallen because they thought, oh. So what we do is we'll go over the class roster from the semester before just to refresh the memory. So when we see somebody in the hall, and it's not that we didn't want to marry, it's just that that's just what happens. Now I know I'm going to get some snickers with this one because this is the one that the students always give me a bad time about. One of the things I learned as a professor is to tell the students that it is a marathon and not a sprint, right? In other words, because everything we do about TCU means you can't work fast enough, you can't work hard enough, and it's exciting, it's wonderful, but you will run out. It's like you try to start a 26-mile, 385-yard marathon, and you sprint it. So you're out in front the first part, and then they all come back to you. You have to learn to pace. So I say to them, some of the best things you could do is don't think about me at all this weekend. Forget about rhetoric. Go out and do things as if you're a normal person and just have a life and come up for air. I do invoke the Protestant ethic. I try to instill great guilt. I turn papers back on the next class. The next class meeting. I have them back. I have the papers. I read them so much, some of the students look, because I've almost memorized their paper. I'll say, well, as X said this, and he said this. And I never do the negatives. If there's something that we screwed up on, I'll write just a list. I'll say, here are the mistakes that happened that we all could benefit from. But if they do something great, I laud it. Would you be shocked to know, and I did this as a joke, but it works, if a student does a great paper, they get a star. You can go to Albertsons, and you can get them for 99 cents. And of course, Andy, the highest star is the purple star. The purple star. But I've had students, believe it or not, they'll say, I did one more draft because I wanted that star. And if it works, it's worth going to Albertsons to make it happen. Here's the miracle of teaching, and every professor here will know this. And it's very rare, but it happens. It's when students have a moment of epiphany. And it is a moment. It doesn't happen very often. In my classes, maybe a few times. But this is when a student who sort of is going through the paces, doing this, realizes that she or he could actually be an A student. Because most students do not realize the talents that they have. I know them better than they know themselves. And I know what that sounds like, but I do. I can tell that they have the talent, but they haven't tried yet. They haven't really they think they have, but there's this moment when they realize, oh my God. And sometimes students just want somebody to believe in them. You would be shocked at how meaningful it is just to say the truth, that you have talent. And maybe this grade isn't what you want, but I know what you can do. And if they see you're sincere, they'll give you everything they have. I want to also mention some things that I've learned about as a professor, and it's trying to be a colleague from what my family taught me. My mother worked in a school. I know who really runs the school. all due respect to all the administrators here. My mother worked in the office. I know who really does the job, and I respect them for all this. And I've had every job in this university. I've been an errand boy for my mother, where I was running stuff all around. I've been a custodian. I worked for Diamond Janitorial and cleaned schools when I was in college. I was a teacher, and I had a brief stint as an administrator before I came back from the dark side of the force. It's a joke. It's a joke. All right. Get hateful emails for that one. All right. Remember that it's an honor and a privilege to hold this position. I want to tell you a story that my wonderful late wife Jane used to say when I was doing jobs around the house. And I have kids here who will testify to this. I was doing jobs around the house. My wife Jane used to say to me, "Why don't you pretend this job around the house?" She'd say, "Why don't you pretend like you're doing it for TCU?" I told that to Bill Kaler. I told that to Kaler once, and he said, "Tell Jane not to say that anymore, please." A professor, here's for my colleagues who are also, you know that a professor has to be both a coach and a player. We have to not only teach people how to do certain things, we have to do it. We have to produce. We have to do our research. A professor, I tell the students, they pay us to produce. It's like if you're a plumber. They don't pay you to try and fix the leak. They pay you to fix the leak. And that's what we have to produce, not to try to produce. But that's a part of what we do. That goes in with what we do. And I also what I learned is that graduate students enter the program as students, obviously, but they leave as colleagues. And that's what we do when we teach graduate students. And so we actually have a session with some of them when they pass their qualifying exams, and that means technically they're out of the program and the only thing left are requirements to bear solely on the dissertation, where they go to my office and say, "Okay, now I don't want you to call me Professor Enos anymore. I want you to call me Rich." And some say, I can't do it. I said, "No, let's try Rich." Some of them actually can do it. Some of them can do it. Let me conclude by saying this. Aristotle said in his Nicomachean Ethics that we can't determine if a person had a happy life until that life is complete. That's what Aristotle said. You have to look at the whole life. I think on this point, Aristotle was wrong. For I already know I've had a full and happy life. And all that happiness from now on is just a beautiful bonus. And I want to thank you, and I have some concluding remarks that I'm so concerned I say this right, I actually wrote them out, for giving me this moment and making me have the happiest that came from this kind of life. I tell my students, I said, I'm retiring from formal teaching because teaching is exhausting. You take your job seriously. It's exhausting to do that. And they deserve the best. And, my tank is running on fumes now, and I do everything I can, but I realize that. And I want to tell you that I'm looking forward, I hope this happens, that I can be an emeritus professor. For those of you who are not familiar with this term, after you retire and you meet certain requirements, and there's a stringent review of emeriti, you could be awarded an emeritus professor. Now, the original Latin term for that, believe it or not, means weary. Did you know that? It is. That you can, but the Romans took it as a term, it became a military term, where you could keep your rank, but you were on inactive duty. So it would mean a lot to me to still be called a professor, because it means it's part of my life. Here are the last things I want to say, and this will only take a minute more, and thank you for listening. In my last words, I would ask you to look around at what you see every day. TCU is grand. TCU is spectacular. TCU has emerged to take her place as one of the outstanding universities in America. While we bask in all that glory, let us remember our roots. Let us not only remember how we came to this status, but also continue to make it the core of our identity. In our heart, we've always put the students first. We have, every chancellor here has said that. Chancellor Tucker, Chancellor Ferrari, Chancellor Boschimi, they all, and you can listen to them, and they all see that as the center. We have shown not arrogance, but compassion and caring. Long before it was fashionable to say, we are a family, we always were a family at TCU. I'm sure that much more confetti will be thrown TCU's way in the years to come. But while we bask in that glory, never forget what and who brought us to this position. This is the last part I want to say, and this is the end of the 46 years, so here it is. Shortly before the University of Connecticut was to play the NCAA men's basketball finals, and John just told me that was 1999. Thank you, John. I didn't realize that year. The then coach, Jim Calhoun, brought back the players from the past Connecticut teams and told them and the players that would take the court that night that these former players were the reason they were playing in that final tonight. They would not be on the court to celebrate the championship that the current players did go on and win that night, but they were every bit a part of that victory as the team that played and won that night. I hope we never forget and never stop living out our humble and proud identity, that we always appreciate the past that has given us this present and that will guide our future. There was never a moment when I did not recognize that holding the Radford chair was an honor and a privilege. As my daughter Sue says, I've been living the dream. Thank you for allowing me to live the dream. Thank you for the honor of being a Horned Frog, for teaching Horned Frogs, and continuing to be a Horned Frog. The life of being a professor was a life worth living, and I thank you for giving me this moment to share with you today. Thank you very much. Thank you. Sit back down now. So that's...
So it's a tough gig to follow Richard Leo Enos and the perfect speech. Thanks, Rich. So my sixth grade teacher, not Rich, was quite old, and he didn't get around very well, but I really admired him, and he was such a good teacher for children. One day his class changed my life. It was near Christmas, and the days moved slowly with anticipation of the coming holidays. He asked us all to compose a speech that contained a story that we could share as we stood on our own 2 feet facing the class for the first time in our lives. I was very nervous, but I did write one. And I stole the speech from the World Book Encyclopedia Book of Tales because I had no stories to tell. But the punchline contained the word ass, and I was a good little Christian girl, so I changed it to donkey. I didn't realize at the time that ruined the whole joke of the story. So I, sweating and very nervous, I stood up and delivered my speech. And when I spoke the punchline, Mr. Salyer began laughing, and he couldn't stop because he understood what I had done. He continued to laugh so hard that he fell out of his rolling desk chair And then everybody laughed. And as he tried to get up, all the many colored pens in his pockets fell on the floor, and it was crazy. But I realized at that moment that words and delivery had both intentional and unintentional power, and I really wanted to know more. So imagine my incredible luck, or in the incredible moving of Providence, when I found myself in Rich Enos's ancient rhetoric class my very first semester at TCU. If a person really wanted to learn and practice the power of the word, a rhetoric class with Enos was the place to till the soil and get the yield. On that very first day, and I don't know if Rich remembers this, he asked, "Are there any questions?" And I raised my hand, like I always do in every class. And in true ignorance, I said, "What is rhetoric anyway?" He looked a little taken aback, but then he grinned, and his eyes twinkled with delight, and he said, "Well, that's what we're here to find out, isn't it?" So, and find out we did. Lois Agnew, Richard Thompson, Amy Heckathorn, Julie Smith, and myself, and another set of people in our cohort were all a part of Rich's very first rhetoric class at TCU. I was on the waiting list for entrance into the program, and when Linda Hughes called me to let me know that I had been accepted, she added that, "Oh, by the way, Rich Enos has accepted this position and will be coming to TCU." I had no idea who she was talking about. I also had no idea that I was going to meet and work with one of the best mentors and scholar teachers in my entire life. I had no idea that in that first day of the class that I would meet a lifelong friend and colleague. And I know I'm not alone. Looking out on this room, just like Ann could, I see family, friends, students, and colleagues. All of us in some way have been graced by Rich's presence in our lives. And we are here to receive his final rhetorical words spoken to us as a community. We are blessed by these words, Rich, by each other, by you yourself, and by the spirit of love and friendship that binds us together. I've been buffeted about quite a bit in my so-called career, and I can tell you what happens here is rare. So, Aristotle teaches us about three kinds of, I had to put Aristotle in it, three kinds of friendship: that of utility, that of pleasure, and that of the friendship of the good. For those of us in this community, we know that the friendship Rich has offered us is that third type, the kind of friendship that endures over time and both nurtures and grows. It's a friendship that stems from the goodness in each of us. This sort of friend helps the other friend be as good as she can be. The bonds are filled with patience, intimacy, trust, and admiration, and sometimes awe. A couple of years after I left TCU, I had not graduated yet. It took me a while. I was at a conference in Puerto Vallarta to give a paper on the rhetoric of the social vampire at a Gothic conference. And if those of you that know me know that that is like heaven to me. I had this big, beautiful room overlooking the ocean. It was all set to relax and enjoy myself. I had only been there 2 hours when I got a call from Rich. The feedback from my dissertation committee, he said, would require some work. And it was actually Bob Fry who asked me to do some changes. I knew that it wasn't just going to be a little work, it was going to be more new research. So I said, hey, that's going to take some kind of level of energy. Maybe we should just delay my graduation another year. Rich refused to let me make that decision. He laid out plans to accomplish what was needed and push through to meet the deadline. And he said he would, and I said, I'm worried about what the committee will think about this. And he said, don't worry, I'll stand by you. And he did. I couldn't say no. I delivered my paper, but I spent the rest of the time revising up in my big, beautiful room overlooking the ocean. I didn't meet anybody at the conference. I did not see Mexico, but I finished. And that was the greatest gift anybody could have given to me. I'm not sure I even told Rich where I was or what I was doing there because it wasn't important. That's the nature of friendship. What he was advising me to do was the best thing for me. And I've never regretted not seeing Mexico 1 minute in my life. These personal stories I know may not be what you expected to hear in an epidictic address. I could have used this time to extol more of Rich's many accomplishments and laid that out for us very well. But one thing we know for sure, Rich's has been a significant academic life. And honestly, these accomplishments, they're really not why we're here today. We're all here because of love and respect, because we celebrate his friendship, because his change of perspective now and in the future is going to change our community in ways we don't even know yet. But I wanted to leave you a little bit by talking about Rich as a mentor and a teacher. Fewer rewards exist for excellence in teaching. Rich has gotten a few of these, but the real rewards are sitting right here in this room today. The real rewards are right now mentoring other students in the study of rhetoric and composition. The products of his work as a teacher are us, both faculty and students. If you take a look at the testimonials and congratulations in the memory book over at the back corner, which is going to be a gift for you, there's some purple pages next to it. Feel free to sign in, write a note of congratulations for Rich. It'll go in the book. But take a look at how many people responded to a call to send us notes. But you'll see evidence of his teaching, not just of the subject area, but also of personhood. And I think you heard that in his speech. Rich is in the business of developing persons. As you know, Rich recently received the Mentor of the Year award from Rhetoric Society of America. The celebration of that award was such fun. We cried a lot, as I'm trying not to do today. The celebration of his teaching and mentoring resulted in tons of stories being shared around the room. Parker Palmer tells us that in real teaching, there is self-knowledge. In the very beginning of his famous book on the courage to teach, Palmer stresses the complexity in teaching that seems so true to me. He says that knowing ourselves is as crucial to good teaching as knowing our students and our subjects. So, teaching and learning, it takes the whole self. Whatever makes us intellectuals, whatever makes us people who feel deeply, people who are connected to others and to the world in very ineffable ways. I say again, Rich is in the business of building personhood. And grad school is a primary side of that initial building. In grad school, a student's faith in providence, their faith in personal abilities, their faith in a disciplinary lens is challenged and tried and honed and refined. And it is stinking hard. I know. But with a real teacher, a real mentor, it's also joyful and head-spinning and life-altering. Studying rhetoric and literature here in this place was one of the best times of my life because of the cloud of witnesses that surrounded me at all times and a kind and gentle mentor. So, and in the spirit of John Amos Comedius, who is a person I love from the 1700s, who talked about education as a place, a garden of delight, thank you, Rich, for being that kind of mentor.
Rich, if I could ask you to come up, please. You know, we couldn't have him leave without something to catch the dust.
Oh, boy.
And so we have like to present for you is this
Jody.
small token of our appreciation for everything you've done for the department, for students, for faculty alike. It says, stellar scholar, treasured teacher, and mentor to Richard Leo Enos. Speech!
Thank you, Jody, and I just want to thank everybody. I'm saying the obvious. It means so much to me that you came here, and I'll never forget it. So, and there's a lot of good grub over on that side. So, thank you, everybody.